In the vast blue of the Pacific Ocean, a war unlike any other was taking shape. A war without defined fronts, without safe havens. A war that would be fought across lost islands, open skies, and hostile seas. After the attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941, the world changed. The Japanese Empire was expanding rapidly, seizing control of large areas of Southeast Asia and the Pacific, from the Philippines to the Central Archipelago Islands. Their advance seemed unstoppable, the objective to establish absolute dominance in the region and neutralize any Allied response. The United States, still reeling from the blow, responded with an unprecedented mobilization. The industrial machine transformed. Entire factories stopped producing automobiles to manufacture tanks, bombers, and ammunition. The whole country threw itself into the war effort, but it wasn't just machines crossing the ocean. Hundreds of thousands of young men were being trained, armed, and shipped out to a front they knew little about. They were boys of 18, 19, 20 years old. Many had never left their hometown. Now they were heading thousands of miles from home, toward islands whose names they had never heard. On the docks of San Diego, Pearl Harbor, or Brisbane, the Marines boarded with serious faces. Some joked, others wrote letters, but all knew the journey would be long. As they set sail, they left behind everything they knew. They ventured into the largest ocean on the planet, where every wave could conceal a threat. The war ahead would have no clear front lines. It would be mobile, irregular, and every battle would mean gaining, or losing, a tiny point on the map. Aircraft carriers became the main actors in this new way of waging war, floating giants housing hundreds of men and dozens of planes. On their decks, war was prepared with millimetric precision. Fighters, dive bombers, torpedo planes. Mechanics adjusted every part, pilots studied maps, and in a matter of seconds, aircraft roared across the steel before launching into the sky. The flights were intense, brief, lethal. In minutes, they engaged the enemy. In seconds, everything could change. Inside the ships, life was tense and routine. Sailors worked tirelessly, loading bombs, repairing engines, cleaning decks under the blazing Pacific sun. Some found moments to rest, read a letter, or write home. Others preferred not to think too much about what lay ahead. The naval war in the Pacific was unlike any other. There were no safe places. At any moment, a submarine could strike. An enemy squadron could appear on the radar. A torpedo could change a ship's fate in seconds. For the High Command, the challenge was monumental. The theater of operations was immense. The enemy was disciplined, well-armed, and familiar with the terrain. And every island to be taken meant a new landing, a new battle. But there was no other option. They had to move forward. They had to stop the Japanese Empire. They had to regain control of the Pacific, step by step, wave by wave, island by island. The Battle of the Pacific would not be a single battle. It would be a long, bloody, exhausting campaign. A chain of naval engagements, aerial bombings, amphibious landings, and hand-to-hand combat on impossible terrain. Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Saipan, Iwo Jima, Okinawa. Names that once meant nothing and would later mean everything. Thus began the Battle of the Pacific, a war that would demand everything and would change everything. In the Pacific, the sea was immense, but on land, space shrank to mere meters, sometimes to centimeters. There, on those remote islands covered in dense jungle or volcanic rock, a relentless war was fought. A war that demanded more than courage. It demanded endurance of body, mind, and spirit. And those who fought it were, above all, Marines. It all began with silence. Aboard the landing craft, as the engines roared to life and the ramps closed, the noise of the world began to fade. Only the hum of the motor remained, and the constant thought that in a few minutes they could die. There was no turning back. In front of them, an unknown beach, sometimes calm, other times already engulfed in smoke and explosions. But always on the other side, an enemy determined to stop them. When the gate dropped, hell began. The water reached their waists. Bullets sliced through the air. Some fell before even setting foot on land. Others ran through screams, through fire, through bodies. The sand offered no protection. They had to move forward, find anything that could serve as cover, a rock, a trench, even another body. Chaos reigned, and yet they moved. One by one, squad by squad, they managed to carve out space, push forward, survive. But the beach was only the threshold. Once inland, the landscape changed. The jungle closed in. Visibility dropped to nothing. The humidity became part of the uniform. Boots sank into mud. Weapons got wet, jammed, rusted. The enemy wasn't in front of them. It was all around, hidden, waiting. And then it would strike. Combat on land wasn't just physical. It was psychological. Every step could be the last. Every object could hide a trap. Every shadow could be an enemy soldier. Or not. Sometimes Marines fired at a sound, at a branch that moved, at a whisper. The fear was constant, but not paralyzing. It became part of the routine. They got used to it the way you get used to sweat or the smell of gunpowder. They carried it with them all the time. The enemy fought with absolute determination. There was no retreat, no surrender. Many preferred to die rather than be captured. This forced the Marines to advance with extreme caution, to check every trench, to throw grenades before entering a cave, to clear every position meter by meter, knowing that in any corner there could be one last defender, ready to die while killing. There were no front lines like in Europe. Battle could come from any direction. The terrain didn't allow for order. Fighting happened in small groups, sometimes of just 3 or 4 men. Communication was limited. Orders arrived late. Individual initiative was key. Every soldier had to think, decide, and survive on their own. The days were long, and the nights even worse. In the darkness, the enemy moved with the advantage. They knew the terrain. They knew every hidden path, every opening in the ground. They launched surprise attacks, infiltrations, sabotage missions. Marines slept in shifts, always with their weapon within reach, always with one ear open, always expecting something. On top of all that came the extreme conditions. The heat was unforgiving. Sometimes temperatures rose above 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Drinking water was limited. Rations were few, repetitive, hard to digest. Fatigue was constant. Some men fought for hours without eating, without resting, without knowing how many days they had been there. The body wore out. But the mind had to keep going, and it did. Thanks to camaraderie, to the voice of a buddy, to a wrinkled letter read for the 4th time, to a photo tucked inside a helmet. Amid the mud and fire, unbreakable bonds were born because they knew their lives depended on one another. That surviving wasn't just about endurance, it was about protecting the man next to you. The battles lasted for days, sometimes weeks. Some islands were taken after months of sporadic combat, with no clear progress, no precise maps, only instinct, courage, and determination. When the position was finally secured, the feeling wasn't one of victory. It was of relief, of having survived a little longer, but also of knowing that soon another island would come. Casualties were inevitable and constant. Every morning roll call was done, names were missing, faces, smiles that had been there yesterday, and were gone today. The bodies were retrieved with respect, tagged, covered, silently mourned. Sometimes there was no time, and they were left behind. The fighting didn't pause for grief, it only delayed it. Despite everything, the Marines kept going. Not for glory, not for medals. They did it because there was no other choice, because they understood their fight was part of something greater. Each secured island meant one step closer to the end of the war, one step closer to victory. And that, in the middle of the mud, the fear and the fire gave them purpose. Such was the war on land, a war of flesh, mud, and steel. A war with no truce, no rest, where every meter was earned with blood, where heroism was silent, routine, where the greatest triumph wasn't to advance, but to endure. While the Marines fought on land, another war raged across the waves, a war of steel giants, mechanical roars, and skies torn apart by engines and fire. In the Pacific, control of the sea and air was as decisive as control of the ground. And in that struggle, aircraft carriers were the beating heart of the conflict. They brought everything together: strategy, logistics, firepower, floating fortresses, cities moving with surgical precision across thousands of nautical miles. On board, every man had a task, every action mattered. From the sailor scrubbing the deck to the pilot waiting for takeoff, the rhythm was constant. So was the danger. The sky was a battlefield without borders. Fighters and bombers launched in formation, hurled from narrow decks by officers who knew that every second counted. The pilots knew exactly what they were flying into. Identify targets, strike hard, return, if possible. Because up there, death could arrive silently, in a burst of gunfire, an impact, or a sudden flame. Aerial combat was fierce, brutal, and fast. There was no time to think, only to react. Distances closed in seconds. Decisions had to be made in fractions of a second, and when the enemy dove onto the fleet, every moment became a race against disaster. Alarms blared, anti-aircraft guns roared, the sky filled with tracers, and the men, they simply did what had to be done. But the true weight of this air and naval war wasn't just in the fire. It was in the preparation, the calculation, the intelligence, knowing where the enemy would be before they appeared, anticipating, surprising, striking first. Because a single impact, a well-aimed torpedo, could change the course of an entire campaign. Naval battles weren't always visible. Often they were fought hundreds of kilometers apart by enemies who never saw each other face to face. It was a strategic dance of squadrons, radar signals, reports, and scout planes. But when they finally found each other, the clash was absolute. Explosions, plumes of smoke, planes spiraling down, men leaping into the sea. In those waters, the sacrifice was immense. Lost ships, missing pilots, entire squadrons that never returned. But every naval victory opened a new path. It allowed for progress, for encirclement. It cut supply lines, isolated islands, and ultimately brought the Allies closer to striking the heart of the enemy. The Pacific was a brutal theater, boundless, shelterless. But it was also where naval aviation proved its ultimate power, where the aircraft carrier replaced the battleship as the symbol of supremacy, and where thousands of men, unseen from afar, changed the course of history from a ship's deck or a cockpit. Thus, between sky and sea, triumph was forged, not only with fire, but with precision, with courage, and with the unbreakable will of those who knew everything depended on them.